The Bell Curve. This book stirred a lot of controversy. The Bell Curve is a book that points out intelligence and class structure in American life. The writers, or the people who put together the book, The Bell Curve, Richard J. Herrnstein and Charles Murray. So there's been a lot of debate, a lot of controversy behind this book. And so the reason why that this book has created a lot of controversy is because it points out the differences between racial backgrounds, and also it has political scientist Charles Murray who points out the racial differences in intelligence and how race plays a part in who is equipped to better achieve in terms of job performance, having birth out of wedlock, personal dynamics, socioeconomic status, who are the cognitive elites. And so the Bell Curve has been very controversial. So the Bell Curve, Intelligence and Class Structure in American Life, is a 1994 book by psychologist Richard J. Herrnstein and a political scientist Charles Murray. So people have also refuted these claims in that particular book. So there have been other books that have come about, IQ and Race, the complete overview, showing differences in brain size, or at least they've had photoshops, or either they've had constructed a model of a brain from small to a larger size brain, and then they've put underneath the different ethnic groups or racial groups that are characterized by brain size. So there have been other books that also point out the war that has resulted on the debate of the issue of the bell curve. So what is the bell curve? Originally, this curve is not about cognitive classes and social behavior. Originally, the curve, it's a mathematical bell curve. But how it has been used is to support why people don't achieve in life and why others do. And so if you look, I have other photos or pictures showing the bell curve and how it's been used in divisive ways to stereotype people and to put people in classes that show those whom will achieve by race, by IQ, by test scores, also by gender. So this may be the reason why when you go to apply for certain jobs, they have a procedure where they'll have you fill out applications, but they want you to test. They want you to take a test to see what skills you have. And so they may be using these tests to put together their own bell curve. So it's a normal standard of distribution and standard scores. So this is a normal bell curve shape. This is the bell curve showing the IQ of Einstein. And then you would put yourself in a category. The lowest end is mentally inadequate. The lower end, low intelligence, average. And then as it rises past 100, it's above average. And here's where they put males and females and race. It's also showing the SAT math scores versus annual salaries by major. And so they may not point out these things, but it's happening still till this day. So they'll use the distribution, which shows also a correlation to that bell curve, where it has the black distribution, the white distribution being at range of the highest and on the higher end and on the higher score level. And so it also will put people in the category based on physical abilities. It could be emotional or it could be physical or both. The very weak being at the lowest end and on up to where you're in between that bell curve as normal, and when you go to the higher end of the scale, which is very strong. And also the bell curve has been used in politics. If you look, you see Obama is on the lower side, classical anarchist, and then on the higher end you see Nixon, Mussolini, Hitler, Republican Party, Ron Paul, Murphy. And so you also see how in 1975 they used the bell curve to classify people as in class of people. You have your punk rockers and your hippies on the lower end of the scale. And then as you go up, there's your normal class of people. And then as you go on the higher end of the scale, the intellectuals and the computer nerds, so to speak. And like I said, people who are on this bell curve are also classified as to whether they're going to graduate from college. On the lower end, the ones who won't graduate from Harvard, and on the higher end, people who still might have a chance to get into Harvard. So they've used this time and time again. So this is also used in math. But what they do is they plug in culture, they plug in race, they plug in gender, and they put you on the lower end as being very dull. And if you are in the white race, as being very high on the scale. And again, you see this with class in terms of not only the intellect, but in terms of what you are rated as. Just generally, if you're a punk rocker, a hippie, you're on the low end. If you're a computer nerd and an intellect, you're on the higher end. Also, here is a means scale. Now, this is used primarily in math for you have your mode and your means and your averages, and you have Jewish being on the higher end and on the lower end. Anywhere in between you have that, and on the lower end, blacks. Scientific racism that has supported all of these bell curve claims, and some of this has gone on even back as far as 1868, 1933, where you had people looking at the sizes of people's nose and their brain circumference. And so you have this scale, the bell curve, once again, and you see the different races in different colors, being the higher end, Hong Kong, and the lower end, Kenya. U.S. blacks are the dotted line, which still it ranges in the lower end. And so you have not only people who are white supremacists that use this bell curve to classify who they are, whom they are in terms of IQ and intelligence, but you also have other cultures who feel that they're higher on the scale of intelligence. Sometimes this scale can be flip-flop. You have slaveholders, pro-slavery on the lower end, okay? Then you have anti-slavery and abolitionists. So it can be flip-flopped. So you see how easy it can be used, either as a positive or a negative. This person probably used it to show you the ignorance of people who held slaves. Maybe they didn't have much education, but they used slaves for breeding and for economic purposes, for wealth gain. So here you have also a scale which resembles somewhat of the bell curve, but not exactly. It's a stair-stepping scale of mental development, showing you at the lowest end the idiot and the highest end still a moron, but never really achieving much. And so you see this can be divisive also with females and belittling women, even not only just by race but class, culture. So the term welfare queen had been thrown around for many, many years, and it was always looked at as women of color or women who were black as being welfare queens, when in fact they found that the welfare queen was white. So you also have women who are coined as being virgins or being the other. They use the bell curve. But what happens when you have women that feel that they have no hope? Maybe they dropped out of school. You have some people that they value materialistic items like hair salons, jewelry, tattoos, nails, and maybe phones, but they don't desire to get education because they've been told all their life that they can't achieve. They're low achievers. So you have some people who accept the self-fulfilling prophecy that has been laid out for them, be it people of color, people that are of color in the Hispanic community. Being labeled these negative stereotypes can have a real negative impact even in the person's mindset. So you also have gender wars where you have men here where it shows their scale of abilities, women being on the lower end, even by years. At least they show a woman of 65 having a little bit more of intelligence, but even lower than males. So we know that this is true, that you have people that not only poor people suffer because they're labeled, but you have big companies like oil companies who usually scapegoat and use poor people to further their causes. So who is the real welfare queen? They say these companies, these big companies, don't pay income tax. They're never taxed. They get mega profits. Yet, nobody really points the finger. Well, recently it has been pointed at them, but that's by the people who have been always attacked for being on the lower end of the what they call, quote unquote, the bell curve of race, class, culture, economics. So you see, in 1995, the SAT scores by race and education was evident, where they showed their viewpoint as to whom they felt were going to be the higher achievers. So you see, this was a very racialized grid or graph here. You also see by income and education. Here it looks at race and income. Okay, the other one previous looked at education. So it's much similar. It points out who makes the most money, who has the better education, who has the better opportunities, based on intellect, based on scoring. So, are these tests biased tests? Are these tests meant for people to succeed and others to fail? That was the question that was raised. That is why affirmative action came into play. But many argued against affirmative action, saying that it was biased because it made it easier for blacks to achieve. Or being vice versa, did it make it less easier for whites to achieve? That's the question. So you see this bell curve and how it points out that blacks are inferior and whites are superior. And here's another bell curve. The unfortunate, the most of the people that are in between, and the elites. So this can be looked at in politics. It can be looked at across a lot of issues. Gender, race, culture, class, creed. So this is another book. It's called The Bell Curve Wars, Race, Intelligence, and the Future of America. So if you want to look at more of this, I will leave some links of articles. Thanks for listening.